bushy-tailed because I figured that most of you guys were up late last night and maybe up early this morning, all to realize that we still have no idea what the future holds. So I'd like to thank, just kind of start off everything by thanking Tammy of the BGCT Center for Financial Health for hosting this webinar today and affording me the opportunity to talk to you guys a little bit about today's topic, which is going to be pastoral compensation, key components, questions, and strategies that I hope you're going to be able to take away and implement at least some of them for your benefit in your local church. So a little bit about me. Yes, it's still weird, Tammy, to hear people call me doctor. I just completed my PhD at Southwestern in May, defended on a Zoom call, which was the weirdest thing I've ever had to do. Not many people call me doctor. I love to go by Christian. That's just kind of the way I like to interact, so feel free when we do Q&A. Dr. Messmer is not necessary. Please just call me Christian, brother Christian. That'll be great. My path to seminary was a little bit different than most. I'm a graduate of the University of Tennessee, hence my orange. So, I've got the orange from Tennessee, not the orange from University of Texas. I did that in 2002. I entered the financial realm and arena with a company called Morgan Stanley in Nashville as a financial planner. 5 years later, though, I felt called to ministry. So my wife and I left Nashville, came down to Fort Worth, Texas, and we started the seminary degree. The MDiv turned to the PhD, and during the PhD program, I was invited by Southwestern's Scarborough College to create a math course that would be a little bit better for students than an algebra or geometry that they would normally study in college. So I created a course, Math for Financial Management, which is kind of the equivalent of a personal finance course that I hoped would help to equip our students to lead successful financial lives after seminary. So about a year in, I started getting emails from former students asking for help with compensation packages. They'd gone off to other churches. They were interviewing with churches, and they said, hey, can you help me out? This church is offering me this package. Can I survive? Can I thrive? Can I take care of my family? Can I put money away for retirement? So I spent time really getting to understand the differences between pastoral compensation and what most people would consider normal everyday compensation. For example, my wife who works for a local municipal government, or maybe somebody who works for a large Fortune 500 company, their benefits and compensation looks very, very different than a pastor's. I turned all the info that I had kind of been working through with my students into a white paper and published that with Guidestone in 2017. And I've been advocating for pastors and their compensation ever since. So I've got a few companies. One company is Scholarship Shepherd, which I actually focus on college planning. And we'll talk a little bit about that later as being an issue that a lot of pastors have fear about. How in the world do I get my kids through college? And the other one is Stewardship Shepherd, which focuses predominantly on personal financial stewardship within the local church. So how do Christians steward their finances, and how does the church steward their finances and how does it create a thriving financial stewardship ministry? Education is there. So yeah, PhD, MDiv, BA. But what really matters is I've got a lot of information that I think is going to be beneficial for you guys. And I look forward to sharing that. So, the question that often people raise is, am I in the right place? You sit down to a webinar and you hope that you're not about to waste the next hour and a half of your life. So, you're in the right place if you're a single employee pastor. You're in the right place if you're a senior pastor or executive pastor of a multi-staff church. You are in the right place if you are a lay leader or a member of a local church. So when I talk about pastoral comp, the first obstacle I encounter is that single employee pastors think that this topic is not for them. Single employee pastors normally are shepherding smaller churches with limited resources. And so they immediately think that the topics I'm going to be covering on the financial side, it's never going to work for them. So if you're a single employee pastor, I built this presentation for you. My experience in working with kind of single employee pastors and discussing compensation with this group, with lay leaders, and with churches tells me that there's always something that we can do, whether it's in how you structure your benefits or in finding ways to increase your benefits. There's always something that we can do to help you. Also, I understand from a single pastor side that there's got to be this careful balance that you guys have to hold between your family's personal health, right, and your church's fiscal health. And also the optics that come with a pastor who is trying to negotiate some new salary or benefit with their church. So I understand those type of optics, and I understand what you guys are going through. And I've led numerous pastors through this. So I'm not coming from as an outsider, not knowing your context. If you're a senior pastor or executive pastor, you're most likely here to verify that what you're doing is everything that you can to take care of your pastoral staff. Yes, that is going to benefit you as the executive pastor by helping benefits and increasing benefits. But if you're an executive pastor or senior pastor with multi-staff, your focus is going to be on staff longevity, right? You want to keep a consistent staff and you want to minimize turnover. And compensation and benefits is going to play a very key role in all sorts of staff retention. And finally, some people who are viewing the call today or recording later, you're lay leaders or you're committee members of your church, and you're here to learn a little bit more about pastoral compensation, how it differs from normal W-2 employee compensation, and what you can do to better support your pastors, especially in times like this where many churches and many pastors are struggling financially. Now, if you don't fit into one of these three groups, it doesn't mean that I want you to get off. You don't need to leave. Any pastoral staff that's here, maybe you're a worship minister, a youth minister, you work with young adults, you're going to take away something that you can use to help you as you move forward. So I encourage you to stay on. And as always, hold your questions. We'll write them down and we'll be able to kind of do those. Got unmuted. Am I back? Okay. 76% of pastors knew someone who left the ministry because of financial stress. I know quite a few guys who have over time left for the insurance industry or the brokerage industry or something like that, real estate, to be able to better take care of their family. And 59% of pastors have confidence that they're going to be financially okay 10 years from now, which, that's not a whole lot when you think about the number of pastors that are out there. So these stats are the reason why I'm passionate about helping pastors, mainly for two reasons. Number one, I want you to stay in ministry. The numbers tell me that you need help, and there's not a lot of people who can speak to the situation of a pastor. And if we as a convention don't prioritize educating pastors and their churches on the financial issues that many of you guys are facing and provide resources to tackle these issues, there's a high likelihood that you or someone that you know is going to leave the ministry. Not due to a moral failing, but due to financial. And I think somebody. Awesome, we're back. So, America's got a lot of issues, and the gospel, I believe, is the only solution. So every pastor that leaves the ministry is going to be one less defender that we have on that wall. So I want you in there, and I want you in there for the long term. Second, I worry about pastors thriving in retirement. Retirement used to be 5 or 10 years. Our grandparents worked, their whole lives, retired 5 or 10 years. and then they passed away. Now retirement encompasses 20 to 30 years. And many of you have sacrificed during your ministry, and I want you to have a retirement that is rewarding and not burdensome. And if the statistics that I see from Guidestone's Mission Dignity Project are any evidence of what's going on with pastors, things are only getting worse for pastors in retirement. And I want us to fix those problems now when we have time to do that. When I fast forward to 2020, 5 years later, in the middle of COVID, a different study looks at pastors, and guess what? Not much has changed. The 2015 study discussed the results: stress, leaving one's church or one's ministry, not feeling confident about one's financial future. 2020 gets to the cause that led to all of these results. That second number, look at that. You've got lack of retirement savings, low pay compensation, college savings for your kids, student loan payments that you're trying to make, unpaid medical bills and credit card bills. But that second number, the low pay and low compensation, is the root of all the other concerns. If you've got low pay, if you've got low compensation, even if you manage your finances well, there's a small pie to manage, and debt for living becomes a reality, right? Low or no contribution to your retirement, no college savings, no paying down student loan debt. So if we don't get low compensation and total compensation fixed, all the other concerns will never be rectified. And the numbers we saw from that 2015 survey about pastors and the stress that they're under, they're only going to increase. So here's my goal for today. You know, our goals for today are simple. We want to equip you, we want to provide for you, and we want to give you. Number one, we want to equip you to have a conversation on compensation with advocates in your church. Number two, we want to provide key takeaways on where to start your specific or start giving your specific situation. And number three, we want to give you questions for which you need answers as you move forward, trying to make changes to your compensation package with your local church. Quick disclaimers. Today's seminar is for educational purposes only. The discussion is always going to be based on hypotheticals, not individual examples. I am not giving anybody individual financial or tax advice. And before implementing any of these strategies, consult your financial or tax advisor. And I know some of you guys might not have a financial or tax advisor. That's okay. Reach out to Tammy at the BGCT and the Center for Financial Health. And she's putting together a group of professionals on the financial side, on the tax side, that are willing and able to assist you for free. So the resources are there with the BGCT. Now what you guys have to do, if you need the help, is to reach out to her so she can get you put in place and put in touch with the people who can best help you. So today's agenda, I want you guys to come away understanding, number one, how total compensation differs between a W-2 employee and a pastor. Number two, I want you to understand the 4 benefits that every compensation package should include. Next, I want you to understand 5 important but not necessarily necessary benefits that a church could include. And then I finally want to talk a little bit about some pastor-only benefits that you may or may not want to take advantage of. So as we kind of lead into that, the average W-2 employee, I want to begin our conversation on what people in HR call total compensation, or the total cost of an employee to an employer. So the average W-2 employee that's sitting in your pew receives an hourly wage or a salary. In addition to that, they often receive some sort of benefits package, right? Depending on the company, these benefits may be greatly subsidized by the employer. So let's, in the chart below, I just wanted to list a couple of the benefits that are out there that are pretty prevalent in today's market that companies are using to attract and retain talented employees. On the health side, you've got medical, dental, vision. On retirement, you either got pensions or some sort of 401k, or in our case, a 403b. Earnings, there's base pays, there's cost of living adjustments, there's performance-based pay, there's incentive pay that's out there. When you deal with income protection, you've got life insurance, disability insurance, workers' compensation. When it comes to education benefits, tuition reimbursement, or some sort of continuing ed or training budget is also there. And then on other vacation, holiday, sick, and the big one that we'll talk about here shortly is the employer's contribution to your FICA, in other words, Social Security and Medicare. However, things look very, very different when we start to look at the average pastor. They're going to receive a salary and pay for many of their benefits out of pocket and after tax. So why in the world do they operate that way? Well, in reality, the reason is because over half of SBC churches are single pastor churches. So they can't afford, or they can't offer, because they only have one person with them, group benefits. And this often results in churches structuring compensation in ways that are not necessarily advantageous to the pastor. They may be easy for the church to do, but they're not advantageous to the pastor. And that puts the pastor behind financially. So an example of that is churches may pay the pastor a salary and then expect for the pastor to pay for benefits out of pocket with after-tax money. And this is going to hinder what benefits pastors can select, as is evident by the statistics below. And, as we look at those stats, when you look at health insurance, only 55% of pastors have health insurance. Only 31% of pastors have dental insurance. 64% of pastors are receiving retirement contributions. 38% of pastors receive life or disability. And these stats for health, retirement, income protection, the stats that I see, those are a recipe for disaster, having so few of our pastors getting those benefits, getting those opportunities with their church. So how in the world do we go about fixing these problems? Well, first we have to talk about them. And that starts with the 4 benefits that every church should provide. So based on the stats that we just saw, I know many of you who are here today are not receiving these benefits currently, right? It may be because your church can't afford it. That's definitely out there. And I get it. And that's why I use the term should and not must, because I understand that there's always going to be a couple of folks out there where money's tight and the church can't go out there and afford another $5, $10, $15, $20,000. I get that. However, before we start, I want to be sure that you don't zone out because you think that that what I'm going to discuss in the next 20 or 30 minutes is beyond your church's capacity or capability. I want you to realize that even if your church is small or struggling financially, there is always the opportunity to educate and improve. And you never know what the people in your pews are willing to do until you educate them about your situation, you educate them about what's going on, and then you ask for them to prayerfully help and to consider assisting you. So 4 benefits every church should provide. Let's kind of start there. Number 1, it's the cost of living adjustment. Number 2, it's health insurance. Number 3, it's a Social Security offset. Number 4, retirement contributions. So let's start with a COLA, or a cost of living adjustment. When discussing compensation, the first benefit I recommend pastors seek is a cost of living adjustment, or a COLA. The reason for this is twofold. Number 1, it's actually relatively inexpensive compared to all the other benefits that are out there. And it's easy to explain why you need it. And these are 2 important points when you're trying to obtain buy-in from a committee or your congregation. Inexpensive and easy to explain and to understand. So let's kind of start just with a COLA. A COLA is a yearly increase in your gross wage that offsets inflation. A COLA is not a performance raise. That's something I want to make clear. A COLA has nothing to do with raises for performance. It has everything to do with a raise to keep you in check with inflation. So why is a COLA necessary? Well, number 1, prices for goods and services increase over time. We see this every single year. Your cell phone bill goes up, cable bill goes up, utilities go up, water, electric, gas, food bill goes up. All these things are constantly going up. And without a COLA, your wage buys less goods and services each year. And over the long term, the cumulative lack of a COLA leads to financial distress. And I'm just going to give some examples graphically, kind of how this works. So in an example, let's look at just the impact of inflation on an individual who has $25,000 worth of expenses each year. So this first graph is going to look at inflation's impact on your expenses over time. So let's assume you've got $25,000 in expenses. So that's year one. In year two, the price of goods and services go up, right? And then from year one to year two, the change looks small. But then look as you go to year three, year four, year five, year six. Over the long term, every year, if the expenses that you've got are going up by 1% or 2%, you fall further and further behind without something that's going to adjust for that. Same concept, different illustration. So the last graph looked at inflation that increases our expenses. But what happens to your budget each year? Well, if you keep the same example, $25,000 in expenses, but you don't get a cost of living adjustment, your budget stays flat. So in year two with no COLA, if you've got a 1% inflation rate, you're $250 behind in your budget already. At 2%, you're $500, and that's just for 1 year. If there's no COLA in year three, then you get another $500 behind. And at 2%, now you're another $1,000. Again, over time, that really starts to impact your budget. Finally, increasing expenses and a flat income creates a huge problem. Let's look at this cumulative effect over time. For some pastors listening, you look at this graph and it starts to click why in the world you're starting to fall behind financially. The lack of a yearly COLA explains why, despite your best efforts, you continue to fall behind. It doesn't matter how frugal you are. It doesn't matter how well you save. It doesn't matter how tight your budget is. If expenses increase every single year and your income stays flat, you're going to consistently fall further and further behind. So as you look at this graph, over time, you fall further behind in year two by 500. By year three, you're behind 1,500. By year four, you're behind 3,000. So if you don't receive that COLA, if your budget continues to be flat and your expenses continue to go up, it doesn't matter how careful, how frugal, how good you are with your budget, you're going to consistently fall behind. And that's not due to you. That's just due to the cost of goods and services going up every year. So if your church is behind it, how in the world would you implement a cost of living adjustment? So integrating a cost of living, and I'm also gonna put a performance-based raise in there, just so you can kind of understand how your church could use either one. Assume you've got a 2020 gross wage of $45,000, and the committee meets and decides to give you a 2% cost of living and maybe a 3% performance-based raise. How in the world would you calculate your 2021 gross wages? There's two options. Option one, you just add the rates together and multiply it. Option two will benefit you a little bit more. Basically, you would take your initial wage and multiply that times your performance wage first, and then after that you would multiply that new number times your COLA. And there's just a quick example there for you guys to do that, and then you can kind of put your numbers in there if your church wants to talk to you about a COLA or a performance-based wage. Key takeaway when it comes to the COLA. Remember that the COLA helps your wages keep pace with inflation. It is an increase that keeps you whole over time. COLAs are not to be confused or conflated with a performance-based raise. That is something completely different. And often churches mix those two together. They think just because they gave you a COLA, you shouldn't receive a performance-based raise. So I want you guys to make sure that they see performance-based and cost of living as two totally different increases in pay. And every year you begin without a cost of living adjustment, your budget is going to start in the negative. So what are some cost of living questions that you need to approach? Well, number one, when was the last time you received a pay increase? I think that's key. Number two, when you received an increase, did the memo or did the committee tell you or distinguish if it was cost of living or performance? I think that's key to keep that type of stuff in writing. And then number three, what is a reasonable COLA given your church's location and budget situation. And this third one is probably what I get most of all. So, I can't give you a straight number if it should be 1% or 2% or 3%. What I can tell you is that most rural areas will see a lower level of inflation versus a metropolitan. And different areas of the country are going to be higher or lower. For example, Lubbock, Texas might be different inflation-wise and looking at cost of living than Dallas or Austin or Houston. The key is whatever the inflation rate for your area is, you want to keep pace with it. So if all else fails, you can go out there and your church can figure out what the consumer price index is and tag your cost of living adjustment to that. So those are the key questions that I would start to look through if you are not getting a cost of living adjustment right now and you'd like to approach this discussion with your church. Next, we're going to move on to health insurance. This is the biggie. While the COLA is inexpensive to implement and easy to explain, health insurance is going to be very expensive to implement and very easy to explain. So we're going to kind of flip the script a little bit. It's commonly understood that people need health insurance. Moreover, most of the people in your pews have health insurance, so they understand the benefits of it. However, these same people that have it have no idea how expensive health insurance really is if you have to go buy it on the open market, as most pastors do, because their employer subsidizes a large portion of the bill. So let's just kind of look at some key statistics. The Kaiser Family Foundation does an annual survey where they go out and they look at small, medium, and large companies. They look at the public and private sector, and they're looking at all sorts of data regarding health insurance and the cost of health insurance. The average plan for just a single employee, so a single person plan in 2020 was $7,490. And a family plan was over $21,000. That's a lot of money. And if we look at the increase from 2019, premiums went up about 4%. So employers, when you're out there and you're looking at what employers are contributing, employers often shoulder most of the healthcare premium cost. The average employer pays for about 73% of an employer plan, of a family plan. In other words, if I worked for a company and I had a employee plan or a plan that would cover my family and I would normally only be responsible for about, 27% of the cost versus a pastor who buys it on the open market. Smaller firms might pay for 65% of a family plan, but still, that's a lot of money. And the average employee is paying somewhere around 27% for a family plan. Most pastors, they're married, they have kids, so a family plan is going to be kind of the best example to keep apples to apples. So when I'm looking at these stats, a couple things come up. Number one, look at the cost of the plans. And if you guys have health insurance, and if you're paying for health insurance out of pocket, you understand the cost. And a lot of money is going towards your health insurance every year. So if your church isn't contributing to a plan on your behalf, much of your income goes towards health insurance, especially if you have a family plan. I've got numerous pastor friends who have family plans either with Guidestone or Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they're paying upwards of $20,000 a year. And even if you're paid $50,000 or $60,000 or $70,000, and you're having to pay $20,000 out of pocket, that's a huge hit to a family budget. And a lot of pastors aren't seeing that. A lot of pastors are seeing incomes of $30,000 or $40,000. And so a $20,000 hit to your budget to pay for insurance, that's a lot. So that's number one. Number two, inflation. If your church pays for a set percentage or a set dollar amount of your plan, but it doesn't index that contribution every year for inflation, just how we saw the COLA impacting expenses over time, how every year you fall further and further behind, the same thing's going to happen with your health insurance premiums. So the average family coverage has increased 22% in the past 5 years and 55% in the past 10 years. So if your church has not changed their contribution amount, you're going to fall further and further and further behind in how much you have to pay. Some rough numbers, if we were just kind of looking for your average plan, the average employer contribution for a family plan is about $15,000, the average employee contribution for a family plan is about $5,500. So, if you're trying to take some numbers roughly to your church, these are some numbers that would be helpful as you're making that plea or having that discussion with your church about maybe being able to contribute a little bit more to your health insurance plan. Some key takeaways. Number one, health insurance is expensive. There's no doubt on that. The stats are in across the board. Health insurance is very expensive. And if you're not receiving any help from your church on your insurance, a large portion of your income is going to go towards paying for that insurance. And that's going to minimize what you can do living, saving, spending, or paying down debt. In addition to that, if your church provides a health insurance stipend, be sure that this is going to be indexed annually. If not, you're going to run into the same problem as a COLA, falling further and further and further behind. And finally, realize that in your conversation with your church, that most employers subsidize a significant amount of an employee's health care. So if your church is basically giving you a gross wage and saying pay for healthcare out of pocket, they're not really doing you any favors. And there's some things that we might be able to do to strategize for that. Key health insurance questions as you're kind of looking at health insurance. Number one, does your church cover any portion of your premiums? If so, is that a dollar amount going to be fixed? In other words, $5,000 a year or $10,000 a year, or is it a percentage, 50%, 75%? If so, number one, is the church's contribution in line with the stats that we saw before? Can your church help you with 73% of the cost for insurance, right? Are you paying 20 to 30% out of pocket? If not, that means that you're going to be paying a larger portion and your finances normally will struggle. If it uses a fixed dollar, does your church index that fixed dollar amount every year for inflation? So that's another key question that you should be asking your compensation committee or your staff, talking to your deacons or your elders. Let's talk about health insurance and some key questions and strategies. Because the question that I often get is, how in the world can my church work with me to help me on insurance? Because insurance is expensive and I need help. So if you pay out of pocket for your insurance, would your church allow you to restructure how your insurance is paid? And the reason why is, in the first example, many pastors pay the health insurance company directly. In other words, they use after-tax dollars to pay their healthcare premium. If instead of paying your premium with after-tax dollars, could we make an adjustment to your gross wage by the amount of those premiums and have your church pay them directly, and then get this agreement in writing? And I'll kind of show you why this works out a little better. If you pay the premiums directly, you pay with after-tax money. You may receive a deduction on your taxes, but it's nowhere near going to be as effective. If your church pays the premiums directly, you reduce not only your income taxes, but also your Social Security taxes and Medicare taxes, assuming that you're in the system, because the premiums are not going to be included in your income. As always, check with your accountant. But the recent healthcare changes that we've seen, back in 2018, allowed your church to pay 100% of the premiums, and those premiums would not be included in your income. So that would be a big opportunity for our pastors. If you pay out of pocket for your insurance, would your church allow you to restructure how your insurance is paid? So here's kind of the example on that. If your gross wages are $45,000, and maybe the church is willing to contribute $5,000 to your health insurance plan that costs $15,000. Assume you don't have access to any other plans. Instead of paying $10,000 out of pocket, restructure your compensation package, lower your gross wages to $35,000, and have the church send the full $15,000 to the insurance company. That's something that you could do. Would be a really easy restructuring that would help save you both taxes from an income standpoint, and if you were in Social Security and Medicare. Another example, the 2015 study that I cited earlier found that 31% of pastors have a second job, and that 63% of pastors have a spouse that worked. So if your spouse works and has health insurance benefits, in lieu of paying for those benefits, would the church be willing to offset some or a portion of their cost for the out-of-pocket cost of insurance? In other words, your gross wages are $45,000. The church is willing to contribute $5,000 to your health insurance plan. Your spouse works and can purchase a family plan, and instead of paying $15,000, they can pay $4,000. So instead of you purchasing a $15,000 plan, use your spouse's coverage and ask the church to offset that expense by increasing your wages by $4,000. That's an option. Or, maybe your spouse has a flexible spending account, so you can add, in addition to the $4,000 step up in wages, maybe an additional $1,000 that can go to a flexible spending account. So I'm just trying to think creatively for you about how you might be able to use your spouse's benefits in conjunction with what your church might be willing to do for you. As always, if you decide to make any of these changes, always document anything that's done. In a few years, if your spouse loses their job and with it the insurance that you've been receiving that offset, I want you to be able to go back to whatever your previous compensation agreement was. And number two, like in a few years, if the church is able to start giving, a contribution to retirement or a cost of living adjustment, I want to make sure that that cost of living adjustment is done on whatever your gross wage is, not the offset wages that we kind of put together to maximize your healthcare benefits. So next, we kind of move on to retirement planning after healthcare. So retirement planning is easy to explain, so that's nice. And it's cheaper to implement than health insurance. So I place it third because for most Americans, health insurance is going to be a higher priority, unfortunately, than retirement planning. So let's kind of look at retirement planning. When I worked as a financial planner, the number one goal of most every client was preparing for retirement. There might have been other short-term priorities like, I want to buy a first home, or I want to pay off my car, I want to set up my kids for college. But even all of these were subordinate to making sure that they could retire comfortably. So when I was dealing with retirement, it comes down to two key variables: income, in other words, how much you're going to have in retirement, and number two, the cost that you're going to have to take care of in retirement. So first, how much income do you want to have in retirement, and for how long do you want to have it? And second, what are your estimated costs in retirement? And then finally, are your income needs met by your savings goals and earning assumptions? So when I forecast income in retirement, I usually factor in income from Social Security and income from savings and retirement accounts. So Social Security would provide a base income, and retirement assets would supplement any need beyond what Social Security didn't cover. So when forecasting future costs, it's a little different because I would expect expenses to be fairly low. By the time most people retire, their mortgages are paid off. Car loans, college loans for kids, those are gone. For most clients, medical is going to be fairly low because they're gonna have the medical benefits on the from the Social Security and Medicare portion. They're going to be minimal cost wise. So because for a small monthly premium, you can add medical coverage to the hospital plan of Medicare. So when I began working with pastors, I noticed that a good chunk of pastors either have already opted out or are contemplating opting out of Social Security and Medicare. Stats are a little bit broad on this, but about 15 to 30% of our pastors have opted out. And opting out makes retirement planning much more difficult because there's no base income. And that means that we have to save a whole lot more money to provide that base income, number one. And there's no medical coverage. And as we've just seen, medical insurance is pretty pricey. So, let's kind of start with Social Security and Medicare. As you know, they are both taxes, right? Social Security and Medicare, one provides the disability benefits throughout your working life. The other provides income and insurance safety net in retirement. The key difference between W-2 employees and pastors is that employees don't pay what pastors do. they only pay half of it. W-2 employees pay 7.65%, while employees pay 15.3%. And that's a huge difference. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of opting out of Social Security. I concur with the ERLC, and I concur with Guidestone that SBC pastors should stay in. And I'm currently working on a paper as to why. And I'll post that not only on my website, but also I'll make sure Tammy gets a copy of that to post that with the Center for Financial Health when that's complete. My primary reason for staying is that the exemption that pastors have to sign to opt out states that you've got to have a moral reason and no other reason for opting out. And in my discussions with pastors, the reason that always comes up is financial and not moral. But even if you were able to come up with a moral argument, the problem with opting out and investing the difference is what I usually hear is twofold. Number one, seldom do I ever see a pastor that's actually investing 15.3% of his income. And then number two, the strategy may work if you only have to pay for income in retirement, but medical is the big expense. And I don't think that it's possible to save enough money as a pastor to provide for income and medical benefits. Pastors have the option to opt out, but consider the negative financial impacts of doing so. You would lose the average Social Security benefit, which is around $1,500 a month or $18,000 a year in 2019. You'd lose hospital and then that health insurance premium that you could put in. You would lose disability insurance. And if your spouse has not worked, they would lose spousal coverage. So there's a lot of detriments to opting out of Social Security, and there's a lot of dangers it puts on your family. So I always tell people, consider greatly the risks before opting out. Key takeaways: many church members are unfamiliar with how pastors are taxed for the purposes of Social Security and Medicare. This is why education is going to be necessary for them. They have no idea that you guys pay 15.3% of your income versus what they pay, 7.65%. They're used to paying that amount. They just assume that you pay that same amount. Normally, it's just a really easy conversation, and churches kind of come alongside and help. Seldom is a pastor able to compensate for the loss of income and health care provided by Social Security and Medicare through savings. So I often caution you against opting out. And while the church can't pay the U.S. government directly for Social Security and Medicare taxes, just like an employer would do, like Walmart would do. If you work for Walmart, they would withhold taxes for Medicare and Social Security, and then they would also contribute on your behalf. A church can't do that. While the church can't do that, they can pay for Social Security and Medicare taxes by providing a step up in income that would offset your costs. And I'll just kind of explain how that works in a minute. So how does an offset work? A Social Security offset seeks to compensate the pastor for the employer portion of Social Security and Medicare that the church can't pay on behalf of the pastor. The gross up amount is going to be more than 7.65%, as the pastor is going to pay the full 15.3 on whatever that gross up amount is. And the beautiful thing about an offset is it often encourages pastors who are contemplating opting out of Social Security and Medicare to stay in the system because it makes it more financially feasible for them to live. And it's a simple, rough calculation for a church that wants to do that. So let's kind of work through that. Just a real quick, real easy offset example. If you've got two different individuals, I just basically compare an employee to a pastor. This is how I would show the example with the church. An employee has FICA taxes taken out of 7.65. A pastor has SECA taxes taken out of 15.3. So you can show your church right off the bat that there is a huge impact between the employee and the pastor because of the amount of taxes you have to take off. Then you can start to show them and demonstrate how in the world you have to have an offset. So the math is there. You could always easily plug in your numbers for something like that, and so that you're talking, we'll kind of put that through. But as you can see, the issue is an employee with $35,000 would have to receive an offset. A pastor would have to receive an offset of $3,100 to compensate for the Social Security and Medicare taxes they have to pay as a pastor. And that's a lot of money. And churches can really easily get behind, okay, what can we do to help our pastor stay in Social Security and make him whole if he opts in? So those are, this would be an important worksheet for you guys to work through. This slide here, and then the next slide. And of course, Tammy's gonna get a copy of this presentation so that you can use this and sit down with your committees or whatever. But the goal predominantly is, what in the world can we do? This is how you can plug your numbers in here. How in the world do you use an offset? If your church chooses to use an offset, how should it be used? I want to remind you and to remember that the goal of an offset, so that you can remind your compensation committee, is to make a pastor whole compared to a normal W-2 employee. So with that in mind, if your church is thinking about offering an offset, I believe there's two options. Number one, if the pastor participates in Social Security and Medicare, in other words, if they're paying the 15.3%, they're already paying the tax. So under this option, I believe the best plan is to gross up the pastor's wages, and that's going to provide a true offset. If the pastor doesn't need that money financially, the church could elect to contribute these funds as an employer contribution to the pastor's retirement fund. Excuse me. Or the church could gross up the pastor's wages and elect to put that money into a 403B. Any of those options would be there. If a pastor doesn't participate in Social Security and Medicare, then he's not paying the tax. So under this option, I think the best plan would be to make an employer contribution to the pastor's retirement, since the Social Security Medicare tax was created specifically to provide some sort of retirement safety net. And if the church is going to provide that step up, you're going to want that money to go towards protecting the pastor in retirement. The best way to do that is for the church to contribute that directly to a pastor's retirement account. So a church could gross up a pastor's wages. In other words, just add that step up amount to whatever their gross wages are. The problem with that and the drawback is that there's no guarantee that the pastor is going to actually use those funds for retirement. They might actually just use those funds for living, which kind of undermines the entire reason for giving a step up or an offset. As we move past Social Security and think about retirement, I want you to kind of think about how much pastors have saved. This is, again, a 2015 study that I've referenced a couple times. But the statistics out there show that it's not a rosy picture. 20% of pastors have nothing saved. 12% have less than $10,000 saved for retirement. 25% have between $25,000 and $50,000, 14, 50, and 99, 13, 100, and 200, and 15 over 200. And while these might, especially like the 200 or 150,000, those dollar amounts might sound like a lot. You're about to see that they're going to be nowhere near enough to sustain you in retirement. Because the basic rule that I use when I was planning for retirement is that you should not withdraw more than 4% of your account value each year. And the reason I use 4% is that it pretty much guarantees you're never going to run out of money, despite any moves or shifts in the market. Every percentage point you go over 4 is going to increase the risk that you're going to run out of money. So, if you start taking it 5 or 10 or 15%, you're probably going to run out of money before you pass away, which means there's going to be nothing in there to protect you. I went out there and I found a recent study by Vanguard. Vanguard is one of the largest retirement retirement and asset managers in the world. Their plans out there, they go out there and check them out. And the average account balance for somebody over 65 was $216,000. That sounds like a lot. And again, if we go back before, 15% of pastors have over $200,000 saved. Sounds great. A 4% withdrawal rate on $216,000 gives you $8,000 a year in income. That's not a whole lot to take care of yourself. and take care of your family and to offset expenses. So, something to think about there. On my Social Security and Medicare example, if you require $20,000 in income to go with that, remember I said earlier that the average Social Security benefit is $1,500 a month or $18,000 a year. Your account balance would have to be roughly $500,000, so that if you took out 4% of $500,000 a year, you could take out $20,000 a year. So to live on $38,000 a year, you would need $500,000. Now, for you pastors who have opted out of Social Security, it gets a little bit more dangerous. Assuming you don't have Social Security and you don't have Medicare, now we've got to start looking at expenses and how you're going to pay for retirement. And assuming you opt out, you're going to need $38,000 in income, the $20,000 that you were going to take out of your normal accounts, plus the $18,000 you're not going to have in Social Security. And then in addition to this, I just assumed $10,000 for medical insurance, and it might be a whole lot more. So to create an income stream of almost $50,000 a year, you need $1.2 million. So you can see how retirement, opting in and out of Social Security that provide those benefits for medical and also that stream of income, that's the difference between surviving on $200,000 or $500,000 and needing a very, very large amount to have a halfway comfortable retirement. So again, big issues to kind of work through. So once you get through Social Security and Medicare planning, the next thing we want to look at is retirement planning, or as you would know it, contributing to a 403B. Individuals in the public sector have a 457 account. Individuals who are dealing in the private sector have a 401k plan. For individuals in the nonprofit world, there's the 403B. So that's kind of where churches are going to be putting their money. So many companies are going to offer an employer-sponsored retirement plan to employees, and these plans normally allow for a matching contribution, a profit-sharing contribution, or both. When you look out at the statistics for what employers are offering their employees, there's two major ones that are out there. The first match is 50 cents on every dollar, up to 6%. The second match that's really popular out there is dollar for dollar, up to 6%. So if your church right now is not contributing anything towards retirement, this would be a way for you to talk to them about what other institutions do to take care of their people. So employees can also contribute a flat amount or a percentage of salary without ever requiring an employee to contribute. There's lots of different ways to quote unquote skin the cat, but I did want to at least walk through from retirement. These are some of the best practices that are out there when we're dealing with companies offering retirement plans. When we're dealing with church options, I think by and large, your church should strive to create a plan that's going to help a pastor get to that 10 to 15% of his or her gross salary. That can come in through matching contributions. In other words, a pastor contributes money and the church matches it. It could come from non-matching. In other words, the church says, I want to contribute a flat percentage of salary or a flat amount of dollar amount every year. Those are easy ways to do it. You could contribute your Medicare offset, your Social Security Medicare offset to retirement. Another way to do it is at the end of the year, offer, a love offering or an anniversary offering. Take those funds and put that towards retirement. There's a couple different ways churches can help to fund that. The key thing is getting your people to understand that most employers will have some sort of retirement benefit for their employee. And you as a pastor would just like to see the same sort of benefit that an average person in your church pew is receiving. I'm going to show you just a quick example. If you made $35,000 a year, there was a match of dollar for dollar up to 6%, and you just made 8% a year, and that's compounded monthly. I just want to show you statistically and numerically kind of what the numbers would be for you so that you can see, man, there's the opportunity, even if I make very little money, there's the opportunity for me to put some money away. It'll grow over time, and I'll have some money in there at retirement. So if you started at year zero in 10 years doing that, assuming your wage never increases, you'd have 76,000. That's that first dot right here. So I'm sure you see that. That's 76,000. By year 20, right here, you would have this $247,000 number. And finally, if you were able to do that for 30 years, you'd have 600,000. Some of you could even get to the 40 years. Then you're talking to that 1.2 or 1.3 million dollar number, which would put you, even if you opted out of Social Security, that would put you fairly safe to be able to pay for your normal retirement expenses and have income, and also your other expenses for medical. So something for you guys to think about there. When you deal with retirement planning questions, I think the big question that I would start off with is, am I taking advantage of the BGCT's small church matching program? And, this is something, if you're a smaller church, the BGCT is partnered with Guidestone to offer a match for eligible pastors. What does it take to be an eligible pastor? Number one, have you affiliated yourself with the BGCT? Step one. And have you contributed at least $500 to the BGCT? If you've done that, any church or minister who contributes a minimum of $105 a month, the BGCT will automatically contribute $17.50. In other words, you contribute $105, the BGC contributes roughly 15% of that, matches 15% of that to go to your retirement account. So that's a really easy benefit that you could talk to your pastor, your church about, your compensation committee about. If they're not putting any money, if you're not putting any money towards retirement, that would be a really easy win to all of a sudden get a 15% match, not from your church, but from the BGCT. So that would be a fantastic start for you folks who are trying to get more money into your retirement account. Number two, what percentage of my salary am I as the pastor contributing? Number three, what percentage of my salary is the church contributing? Remember, we talked earlier, most employers have an employee contribution, and that employee contribution then is matched with an employer contribution. So knowing those numbers, you can talk and have a good conversation with your church. What are my retirement income's needs? In other words, what am I going to need in retirement? And then you have to backtrack those numbers. How much have I saved, right? And how much do I have until retirement to hit those retirement numbers? And then finally, if I'm receiving some sort of offset, maybe it's that Medicare Social Security offset, would it be better if instead of me taking it and putting it as part of my income, having the church contribute that towards my retirement? So I get just more and more money going towards retirement. Those are some questions for you to think through and some questions for you to work with your church through. The four benefits we just covered, COLA, health insurance, and retirement, are benefits that every pastor should have. I'm a firm believer in that. But there are a few other benefits I want to quickly mention that many companies provide to their employees, which would, if your church could come alongside you and provide some of these, would continue to provide a generous package for you, the pastor. So number one, I'm going to start with life insurance. Most companies are going to offer some sort of salary benefit. In other words, 1% of salary, 2% of salary, 3 times, or it's not percent, 1 time salary, 2 times salary, 3 times salary, or they might give you a fixed dollar amount. Excuse me. Second would be disability. Most companies offer some sort of disability benefit on the off chance that an employee is disabled. Normally, that benefit will pay between 50 and 60% of the employee's current wages in the event of disability. In addition, state and federal laws requires most companies to provide workers' compensation just in case somebody was injured on the job, and churches are not required to provide that. They're exempt from that. So seldom do you see churches provide workers' comp. So that's kind of a drawback to a pastor. Now, when I talk about life and disability, I want to kind of highlight an opportunity that the BGCT provides for pastors. A couple seconds ago, we talked about the matching contribution that the BGCT gives. That's $17.50 for every $105 that you or your church contributes. Two other benefits that they offer to affiliated churches, and again, those are churches that are aligned with the BGCT, and those are churches that make contributions of $500 or more to the BGCT, are life insurance and disability insurance. If you as a pastor are contributing at least, or your church, contribute at least $50 a month to a 403B, you're eligible for a small life insurance policy that is taken care of by the BGCT, and a small disability policy that's going to be taken care of by the BGCT. The life insurance policy is going to be staggered. The younger you are, the bigger your benefit. The benefit starts at $100,000, and then as you get older and older, it's going to decrease all the way to, I think when you're in your 70s, it's a $10,000 benefit. But still, anything you can get for free, especially if you don't have life insurance now, that's a huge benefit to your family. As far as disability, they're going to provide a small disability policy that would provide $500 a month in the chance that you become disabled. Again, and all that's going to cost you is that alignment with the BGCT, your church contribution to the BGCT, and then you contributing to your own retirement, or your church contributing to your own retirement. Those are two benefits I think every church can afford. So right now, when we've talked about things that churches can afford, churches should be able to afford to help you out to get to that $104 a month retirement. That would get you the extra $15 or $17.50 matching. Churches should be able to afford the $500 contribution to the BGCT every year. That's less than $50 a month, and that would get you a small life insurance and the small disability. Those are small things that you guys could do, small approaches you can make to your compensation committee, to your elders, to your deacons, that should be easy to do to get you additional benefits. Some other options that are out there that I love are tuition reimbursement. An educated workforce is a productive workforce. So many companies provide employees the opportunity to receive additional training pertinent to their job. When they go back to seminary, we'll help pay for a course a semester or a course a year. Another thing is continuing education. Same idea as tuition reimbursement, but these funds, maybe they're used for conferences. Maybe you're going to the general convention. Maybe you're going to the SBC convention. Maybe you need some books for your sermon series, some commentaries or things like that. Maybe you want to attend a seminar. Any of those options that your church could pay for would be things that aren't out of your pocket, and that would be a huge benefit to you. Another big offer would be a car allowance. Car allowance are huge, and a mileage reimbursement. Pastors use their cars all the time for ministry, and a mileage reimbursement or car allowance is going to help a pastor to offset costs all related to the upkeep of that car. And the last thing you want is for a pastor to drive their car into the ground and then need to buy a new car and not have any income to help offset those expenses when he's been using or she's been using that car for ministry purposes. That really puts the pastor at a disadvantage. Now I want to deal with some specific benefits to pastors that W-2 employees don't have access to, but pastors do. 3 benefits: housing allowance, a parsonage, and a sabbatical. Okay, so we're gonna hit these pretty quick. I know that I've got about 20 minutes left. I'm gonna try to cover these in about 5 to 7 minutes and leave us, around 10 minutes to finish this conversation up on our Q&A. So housing allowance. Okay, number 1, the ministerial housing allowance allows ministers to exclude some all the way up to all of their ministerial income, as long as it's designated by the church as a housing allowance, and it will exempt that from federal income tax. Earlier, when we were talking about the benefits for pastors, only about 70% of pastors take advantage of that. And this is something your committee can do really, really easily. It's not going to cost them a thing. And if you're one of these pastors that doesn't have currently and doesn't utilize a housing allowance, that can save you huge amount of money on the tax side. So that's something you want to look at. So let's look at an example. A pastor earns $45,000 in gross wages. If no housing allowance, the entire $45,000 is subject to federal income tax and then Social Security and Medicare, or what we call SECA taxes at 15%. That's huge. If you have a $15,000 housing allowance, how the government would look at it is $30,000 is considered gross wages and subject to federal and SECA. $15,000 would be exempt from federal income taxes and only subject to SECA. That could save you, I mean, think about federal income taxes on $15,000. That could be a lot of money. That could be $1,500 or $2,000, depending on your income and your brackets. So, that's a huge benefit that 70% of pastors, as we see from, recent studies, aren't taking advantage of. And that's a really simple fix that you can make. The housing allowance is the easiest thing and the easiest change you can make to your compensation structure that can help you out. And it costs your church absolutely nothing to do. When you're establishing your housing allowance, you want to follow some basic rules. Number one, you want to document before every new tax year begins. In other words, before 2021 begins, you want to have your housing allowance in writing, approved by your church, signed off. Okay, the document is going to say how much your housing allowance is, and it's been approved by your business committee, by your elders, by your deacons, by your congregation, however your church governance structures that approval process. Step two, know the rules. The housing allowance is the lesser of three numbers: the allowance designated by the church, the actual housing expenses, or the fair rental value. For the most part, most pastors are going to fall into that second option, this piece right here, actual housing expenses. So yeah, if you have housing expenses, guess what? You can take advantage of the housing allowance. And as we'll see in a minute, even if you live in a parsonage, you can take advantage of a housing allowance, provided that you pay for some of those expenses for the parsonage out of pocket. So let's talk about this. Key takeaways for your housing allowance. If you're not taking advantage of the housing allowance benefit, do so immediately. Number one, if you're not documenting your housing allowance properly, do so immediately. It's better to use a higher number on the church-approved housing allowance than a lower number. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's your accountant or you that's working through your taxes that's going to determine your true housing allowance. The number that your church approved is the odds of it being the exact housing allowance you're going to use is pretty much zero. So the higher the number, the better, because throughout the year, if something changes, if you decide to get a more expensive place to live, or your utility bills go up or something like that, you might price yourself out of being able to use those funds or those expenses towards your housing allowance. The biggest thing with the housing allowance that I want to get through with pastors is the church approves the number that the pastor designates. They do not decide your housing allowance. That is the pastor's decision. The church merely approves it. Let me explain why. The church doesn't designate how much a pastor should spend on housing any more than a pastor should tell their congregational members how much they should spend on mortgage and rent and utilities and all those types of things. The only job that the church has is to approve it. After that, it's on the pastors. It's on the pastor to utilize it properly, okay, and to take advantage of it and to file it properly. And then finally, you may have a parsonage and a housing allowance. So we'll kind of get to that. Housing allowance questions. Do I currently claim a housing allowance? That's great. Number two, am I claiming a housing allowance correctly before the start of your tax year and in writing? And remember, it's the lesser of those three numbers. Am I maximizing my allowance? In other words, look over your expenses this year for your housing allowance. What did you pay for everything? Your mortgage, your rent, your property taxes, your insurance, all of those things, utilities, furnishings, improvements. What did you pay? Light bulbs, all of that. Itemize all that and then make sure that at a bare minimum next year, that's your housing allowance number. I would always recommend taking whatever that number is and maybe adding 10 or 15% to that, because at the end of the day, if your housing allowance that your church approved is higher than it is, it's going to wash out when you file your taxes. But if it's lower, it's going to be to your detriment when you file your taxes. So if you're unsure of what number you should go with, always go with a larger number, okay? Always give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Parsonage. Parsonage, that's a benefit that isn't taken advantage of by pastors like it used to, right? Parsonage benefit, originally, lots of pastors lived on the church property. And a parsonage was a church-owned home in which the church allows the minister to live rent-free. Now, we got to remember that it's rent-free, not tax-free, because the U.S. government will always get their pound of flesh. Around 25% of pastors live in a church-owned parsonage. So, there's a good chance that somebody I'm speaking to is in a parsonage right now. The fair rental view of that parsonage, or the fair rental value, that is what, it's not going to be included in your income, but you are going to pay Social Security tax, that SECA tax, that 15.3% on that fair rental value. And the really great thing that I love about a parsonage is you may claim the housing allowance in conjunction with the parsonage. In other words, let's say they provide you a parsonage, but you pay for water, electric, cable, you've paid for some upkeep, whatever those itemized expenses, you can claim those for your housing allowance. So, light bulbs, any of those things, keep up with that, keep up with those expenses. You can claim those on your housing allowance in addition to having a parsonage. So remember that. Benefits and drawbacks of a parsonage. It's kind of a catch-22 with the parsonage. Benefits. It's a really inexpensive living arrangement. So you pay SECA on the fair rental value, no federal income tax. That's really nice. You could utilize a housing allowance for expenses that you pay for. Also really nice, because that helps offset some taxes. The drawbacks, you don't own the home, right? And if you don't own the home, you lose the opportunity for an asset that appreciates. You lose the opportunity for an increase in the equity as you pay down the value of that mortgage, right? You lose the ability you have to build up your credit. And you lose the ability to tap that asset at retirement once it's paid off, or the equity that's built up. So that's the really big drawback. The other one is often pastors who live in a parsonage, they don't actually save what the mortgage payment should be or the rent payment should be towards retirement or towards the purchase of a home. So the issue I hear with pastors is often, use the parsonage and invest that money in a mortgage payment or to put a down payment on a home. That's fantastic. And it's a great decision if you actually follow through. Most pastors I talk to, they don't do that. They might live in a parsonage, but they're not saving what they should be spending on rent towards the purchase of a down payment or the down payment of a home, or putting it towards retirement. Neither one. And that's a danger. They're living on it. So they're spending that amount. Parsonage questions. Maybe you currently rent and the church has a parsonage. Well, number one, is the church parsonage available, and can you take advantage of it? I think that would be huge, because that could definitely increase, help you on your income if you weren't paying rent, but now just had to pay SECA taxes on the fair rental value. If so, how much could you allocate towards your savings and investment if you weren't renting anymore? That would be huge. Number two, am I including the fair market value for correct tax payments? Remember, you don't pay federal income tax, but you do pay SECA tax, that 15.3%. What, if any, expenses do you pay regarding the parsonage? So itemize all those expenses. What are you paying? How much are you paying? And then use that to offset on your housing allowance. That's huge. And then if you're not taking advantage of the church's parsonage, but would you be better off financially if you did that? It might be inconvenient. It might be smaller than your current living arrangement, but would you be better off? Could you make your dollar stretch further? And if so, would it be a good decision to take advantage of that? Sabbatical. Sabbaticals have been popular in the ministry for a long time. Recently, educational institutions and now even, Fortune 500 companies offer it, taken from, Leviticus and the Levitical law, which called for that period of rest every 7 years to let the ground lie fallow, or, that concept of the year of Jubilee, right? To let it lie fallow, that every seventh. In the church context, a sabbatical, you receive your pay and benefits during that sabbatical period. It is not a vacation. It is a period of rest where you don't have ministry responsibility. And as a result, you're able to renew yourself. You're able to renew yourself physically. You're able to renew yourself emotionally. You're able to renew yourself spiritually. And in doing so, that's going to fend off burnout. Remember, financial burnout and the stress of just being a pastor is huge for burnout. You also get some family time with your spouse and kids. And the average pastor I know, they're working 50, 60, 70, 80. I know guys that work 90 hours a week. That is a neglected family at home. And kids need their dads, right? And kids need their moms. And spouses, they need their spouses. And for you to take some time off, maybe it's a month, maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 6 months, and to recharge and to recoup and to make sure that your family is strong first, that can be the difference between staying in ministry because your family and your marriage is strong, and leaving ministry because you just got divorced, right? And we've seen divorce rates start to increase among pastors. So, time with family, time with kids, great opportunity for the church to come along. The other the other piece with the sabbatical is that period of study, that period of rest, that period of vision and mission casting to come back fresh, recharged, and rejuvenated for your church when you get back. So sabbatical, not a lot of church offers a sabbatical, but even talking to your church, maybe they can't pay you anymore, but maybe they would allow you to take 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off, a month off, just to recharge, but it still pay you salary and benefits. That alone would be a good opportunity and something to talk about. Concluding thoughts. So what if my church already does these things? So if so, you probably have better benefits than most of the people in your pews. Tell them thank you, right? And demonstrate your appreciation for loving you and your family well. How do I go about beginning a compensation discussion? Number one, have a great understanding of your financial position. Have a great understanding of your church's financial position. Determine what other pastors in your area receive with similar church attendance and budgets. I think those are easy conversations to have with other pastors. And in doing so, you can have those conversations with your church. And then find a few members who are going to serve as advocates for you during all of these discussions. You need to inform them of your financial situation. You need to educate them with the information and statistics that I provided in this presentation. And finally, you need to ask them for help. And I think if you do all three of those, number one, you're gonna find advocates. But number two, you're gonna find people who are willing to go and spread the word that something else needs to be done. And I think when you do that, and the church comes together, and God's people are willing to sacrificially give, there's a lot of benefit opportunity that can come into play. What if there are no additional funds to help? I've met with guys, and this is a tough thing to work through. See if you can get a part-time job. That's number one. If there are no other funds to help, see if your church would allow you to take on a part-time job. Provide the benefits to your family. Number two, see if your church is willing to provide or to transition you from bivocational transition you to a bivocational role so you can find a full-time employment role without the reduction of pay or benefits. In other words, they realize that you can't afford, based on your family and financial situation, to work for them full-time. But as a result of their love for you, their appreciation for you, what you do for them, they know that you can still transition to becoming a bivocational pastor, still take care of them. But in doing so, it would allow you to not only take care of your church family, but now provide for your family, which is your highest and best priority, right? So this is an idea. And if you tried number one and number two with no success, you need to examine what additional options you have available to you to take care of your family. And those are tough questions, and those are tough conversations. And sometimes they need to be made. If the church is able but doesn't want to assist further, you want to understand what the disconnect is. Again, trying to bring in the BGCT and an outside advocate that might be able to help talking with the committee or with your deacons or with your elders, that would be huge opportunity to help. Inquire if a bivocational role is possible, and finally examine your options. Finally, I get this, kind of all the time. What in the world should I be paid as a pastor? Pastors are often underpaid given their educational level. Bachelors, most pastors have at least a bachelor's. The majority of pastors now have a master's, and probably about 20 to 30% of pastors out there now have some sort of advanced degree, whether it's a PhD or an ED or something like that. Another profession that suffers this same kind of underpayment is a teacher, right? Specifically K through 12 education. So while compensation and benefit information may be hard to find based on your church's size or churches around you, what is easy to find around you is looking at a local ISD, an independent school district's website, and figuring out how much they pay their teacher. And normally they're gonna publicize salary, they're gonna publicize benefits because it's a recruiting tool, and they're going to look at how much the benefits cost, how much a teacher makes with 1 year of experience, 2 years of experience, 5 years of experience. And those things can kind of play into the compensation role. And again, a teacher, like a pastor, is a well-respected member of the community, and they serve in what I call a public service role. Same thing as you guys do. Yes, you work for a church, but at the end of the day, you are serving your local community. You're serving the people in your church, and you're serving the unbelievers in the local community, right? Through the ministry and the mission work that you do. So seeking similar wages and benefits to what is available to local teachers, I think is a reasonable ask or a reasonable suggestion. Your church may or may not be able to afford that, completely understand, but it allows you the opportunity to start the conversation. And again, where education can begin and conversations can be had, the movement of God can be made throughout your people. If you're looking for more guidance, feel free to keep up with Guidestone. The compensation workbook and paper that I wrote there is on Guidestone's website. Look for me on Church. If you got Facebook, Church Steward Tips, find that on Facebook, like the page. I just started it. So, it's not gonna have any content up there. I've got a website that'll be coming up shortly, and you will, I'll get you kind of all plugged in. But you'll receive a weekly email from me on stewardship opportunities and stewardship ideas, personal finance concepts, starting a stewardship ministry, pastoral compensation, all the things that are going to help you thrive in ministry from a financial standpoint is what I want to bring to the local church. And finally, if you wouldn't do me a favor, email me, let me know you were here today. Let me know what was helpful for you. Let me know something that I didn't or maybe didn't address that you'd love to see addressed, because we want to continue to give this presentation. And the best way to make it better is to make sure that the needs of our pastors who have attended have been met. So please look me up, Facebook, find me, shoot me an email on, through your email account on some things like that. And with that, I will turn it kind of over to Tammy for some Q&A.
All right, thank you so much, Christian. That was a lot of information, very helpful information, and just thank you so much for breaking down a lot of these kind of what can be complicated benefits for pastors in a way that we can understand and for ourselves, and also share it with lay leaders as well. So if anyone has a question, I'm going to unmute. Let's see, did I unmute everybody? How do you can unmute yourselves if you'd like. And you're welcome to ask a question, and we'll try to see how it goes that way. Or you're welcome to put a question in the chat as well. Thank you, Pastor Barber.
I raised my hand. Hi, Tommy.
Hi, Pastor.
It's wonderful time. Thanks so much, you guys. Both of you in the group too. Thank you so much for the burden you have for pastors and the church leaders. My question is about car loans and mileage. Does it mean that the mileage part, I know the mileage part, but the car allowance part, is that like if I have a mortgage on my car, what is that car allowance or rent? I just want to get more information about car allowance.
That's a great question. Christian, can you respond?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on the car allowance. You know, I've seen individuals do things differently. Normally it's one or the other. And again, this will, you know, what you want to put together and make sure that you have in your local church is a policy dealing with the car allowance and a policy dealing with the mileage. So for example, let's say that your church decides to give you $250 a month flat for your car allowance. Normally what that would entail is, you know, what they're saying is we're going to give you a flat $250 and, you know, maybe we want you to apply that towards, you know, paying down. I think in your particular case, you were asking about what do I do with the car allowance if I owe money on my car? Is that you can nod? Is that what you were kind of referencing, or trying to understand just car allowance and mileage separately?
Yes, I was thinking that that's something that I can require them both car allowance and mileage reimbursement, or if when I say car allowance, let's say I am paying a mortgage for my car, is that something that you're talking about, like mortgage, or what is it? Or rent even? Sorry, your mic is mute.
There we go. Okay. So, you know, so for example, let's just kind of take how it's used in the business world. Oftentimes, if you use your car a lot for business, your personal car, what the organization would do is maybe give you, maybe it's $500 a month or whatever towards a car allowance. Mm-hmm. Then as part of their policy, and what you do with that car allowance is up to you. In other words, what they do is they would gross up your income. So let's say you make $30,000 and they give you $6,000 a year towards your car. Now you make $36,000. So you're going to pay Social Security. You're going to pay federal income tax. So that's going to bring that allowance down. But what you do with that is up to you. If you want to use that towards retirement or whatever. Now, what they're hoping, I'm sure, is they're hoping that you're going to put that towards paying off or paying down your car. Okay. Now, normally in policies that I have seen, if you get a car allowance, you also don't take advantage of a mileage. It's not, you usually don't get both, unless your policy might say, for example, like my wife, she receives a car allowance and she's got her car allowance and they also have a mileage policy. So for her car allowance, if she does any driving in the city for her job, all that is covered under her car allowance. But if she has to drive to, I don't know, Lubbock or Houston or wherever, where it's a substantial drive, hundreds of miles, then they would allow her to have mileage reimbursement for that, what they would call kind of extenuating circumstances. So when you're looking to create either a mileage reimbursement policy or a car stipend, look at how many miles you drive per month
Thank you.
and what would be more beneficial. If right now you get $200 a month, but your mileage would get, which you would then have to pay taxes and Social Security, but maybe you would earn $300 a month with mileage that would be reimbursed with no taxes and no Social Security, you would be better off financially with mileage. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's about making sure the policy is written to benefit you as the pastor or the employees who need to take advantage of it. We don't want to put the pastor at a detriment. You know, I don't want you to lose out by getting a mileage reimbursement when you should have gotten a car allowance. I don't want you to lose out for taking a car allowance when you should have taken a mileage allowance. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
And you will be the best person to know how often you drive that vehicle and what the best arrangement for you would be.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Christian. We have another question from Brother Vela. He said, can you explain the difference and benefits between a conventional IRA and a Roth IRA? Which do you recommend?
Okay, so a conventional, so basically it deals with how you contribute the money and then what happens when you take it out at retirement. Those are the two major differences. So a traditional IRA, and most pastors, you're going to put that money in, you're going to put money after tax in, you are going to then claim that on your taxes, right? So that you get the tax benefit for you. That money is going to grow for the 15, 20, 30 years that it sits in there. And when you take it out at retirement, you pay taxes on it. A Roth IRA, you pay taxes on the money now. You do not get any sort of tax deduction for putting it in a Roth IRA. That money goes into a Roth IRA. It's invested. It grows tax deferred for 10, 20, 30 years. And when you take it out at retirement, it is not taxed. Normally, I would strongly encourage individuals like pastors who don't receive large incomes to go with the Roth IRA, because from an income tax standpoint, the income tax is negligible, but the tax deferred growth and then you taking out at retirement with no taxes will be substantially more. The other reason I like a Roth IRA is, as I look at our government, just in general, whether you're blue or you're red, we spend a lot of money and we are in a lot of debt. And the only way to get out of debt going forward is going to be to tax our people more so we can pay down debt, which means taxes are going up. And if taxes are going to go up 5 or 10 or 20% based on where they are now for people in retirement, I would much rather be in the vehicle that allows me to take my money out tax-free than taxable 30 years from now. I hope that answers your question.
I do have one question, Christian and Tammy. How you doing? This is Pastor Gray's New Hope, Roy City. I'm a bivocational pastor. Again, my church is asking me to become a full-time pastor, but with the allotment that I have on my job, I'm at work right now, so I'm gonna have to leave. I've been on the things on the Webinex for quite some time, but they're asking me to become a full-time pastor and also to, be able to do the ministry work there at the church during the day, but they cannot afford to compensate me for full-time pastoral ministry. In other words, what I make on my job, they can't afford. Not only they can't afford, but they don't have the means or the know-how of transitioning from a church that just gave a pastor a salary and he just have to live off of it the best way he can. So I guess what my question is how do I let them know again they have to make those moves to transition to that before I can actually accept being a full-time pastor?
Well, I think that this is where, I often hear the stats that, we've got 49,000 churches in the SBC. And I am a firm believer that of those 49,000, 25,000 churches should be bivocational. They're not. Lots of pastors are doing exactly what you're doing, Pastor Grays. They are transitioning. They're taking a lower salary, no benefits to transition to full-time ministry, and they're not able to provide for their family. And I think that we've done a disservice, number one, just across seminaries in the SBC, of creating this hierarchy that there's a difference between a full-time pastor and a bivocational pastor. There is no difference. Pastor Grace, I would guarantee that even when you are at your work now, the Holy Spirit brings to mind people who are in your church who need you. You're praying for your people. You're thinking about your people. You're loving on your people. You might not be physically at the church, but the church is with you in your full-time position right now. And that doesn't make you any less because you're a bivocational pastor. I think it's the hardest job in the world to be a bivocational pastor because you really have to juggle church, job, family. To go to your question, does your church really need you full time? Now, that might be, you don't have the time to do full-time job, ministry job as what the church expects a full-time minister to do, but they're also not compensating you as a full-time minister. And I think that having those honest conversations and showing them, we just went through all the different things. If they can't provide basically what you're making now in your job, plus the benefits you're making now, in addition to what you're getting paid now, you can't make that transition. It's not financially feasible to take care of your family to do that. And I think that that's an important discussion to have, and a discussion that many of our pastors aren't making. And I think churches have gotten the benefit of having full-time pastors for bivocational pay and benefits for way too long. And we have to start changing the conversation, the narrative, to it is more responsible to take care of our bivocational pastor well than to have him as a full-time pastor and not take care of him at all. Because again, retirement, insurance, those are all things that you should have at a church. And if they can't do that, it does a detriment to your family, which is your number one priority as a husband and as a father, right? It does a detriment to take that job because it puts them at a financial, at a healthcare, at a savings disadvantage. And that's not to say God doesn't take care of pastors in other ways. I'm just saying maybe it's time for the church to recognize a bivocational pastor is a pastor. And you don't have to have a bivocational title. And that doesn't mean you're anything less.
Yeah. Well, I just, like I said, and I appreciate everything. I'm just wondering when we're going to be able to have that. Tammy, I would love for
well, we can talk further about that if you would like. I'm happy once we're off. If you were trying to have individual conversations with your people.
Yeah.
If you want to, let's look at what you get paid at your two jobs, the benefits, and let's try to say, listen, this is a 3-year plan we have to have. This is a 3-year plan we have to have for budget. This is a 3-year plan we have to have for members. This is a 3-year plan we have to have for giving. This is a 3-year plan we have to do this because I can't transition where I am. And this is the danger. Oftentimes churches will to get you to make that jump. They'll say, oh yeah, we can do that. You make that jump, and 6 months later, they're going, sorry, Pastor Grace, we can't afford this. And you've made that jump, and now you're in a pickle financially.
Well, Christian, the thing about it is that in the 4 years that I've pastored New Hope, we've had tremendous church growth, even during the pandemic.
Congratulations.
We paid off we're about to pay off the church. And so because I've implemented community projects, church growth, and all of this, they're saying, well, we can't do this without you being here, to guide us or to lead us in what the vision or the goals are that you're asking. And like I told them, when we look at this and based upon what you just said, I'm already 4 years behind, even in them actually, compensating me for the 4 years. Because again, like I told them, whatever you've done, whatever the church has given me, I'm fine with that, because God has already placed me in a position of not only education, but also in supervisory position in a job where I can actually, not lean on the church, but lean more so on my job, but I have to be at the job.
Well, you've got a good problem to have. You're in a smaller church that's growing, which is awesome. You're getting out of debt, which is awesome. I think that right now it's about a plan, and then finding, I think going along with what you've got, it's so common for churches to want to have the pastor as the primary mover in these community outreach pieces, when I'm sure that there are other really great people within your church, the Timothy to your Paul, that could come alongside, and you could start to mentor and disciple them, that could also take some of the burden off. And maybe in doing so, it would allow you to continue to do what you're doing. That might be another way. But yeah, let's try to put our heads together and see, what would it take, and then make sure that if and when you make that transition, it's a transition that benefits all parties and doesn't hurt you 6 months from now. Because I have seen individuals make the transition, and the church will say, hey, we can make this happen. Here's the salary, here's the benefits. And 6 months later, they tell them that they can't do it anymore. And that's the thing for which I worry. I don't want a pastor to transition and lose those benefits, because that's what takes care of the family.
That's what I'm afraid of.
Right. And that's what I'm afraid of too. And in this economy, that's not good stewardship to you and your family.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I got to get back to work, but thank you so much, Tammy and Christian. Christian, I will email you my email address, and if I could get you to come out, or you and Tammy to come out to the church, and we'll sit down and have these conversations with the church.
We could try to get that scheduled. If nothing else, we can at least do a Zoom call.
All right.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Pastor
Grace. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank y'all. Bye-bye. Thank you, pastors. Bye.
Christian, we got a question from Pastor Rarick. She wanted to know if you recommend, she's in a small church, she's a single staff person, and wanted to know if you recommend having some of these discussions at once, or if it's better to stagger them over the next few years. Just in your experience working with pastors, is it better to kind of implement things over time, or have one big change?
I think, similar to what I was just discussing with Pastor Grace, I think trying to put together a compensation package to which the church could aspire, and then over time, is important. What I get concerned about in piecemealing it is, this year you focus on cost of living, which is great. Then next year, maybe you focus on retirement. I worry about church burnout. In other words, okay, so now what we did last year wasn't enough. And what we did this year isn't enough. What are you going to ask for next year, Pastor? And unfortunately, and maybe I'm cynical, in sometimes how I've had to work with some of these pastors, and because the congregation doesn't understand how pastoral compensation works and how little pastors actually make after salary, benefits, and taxes. I'm cynical about constantly returning to the well and asking for more. Instead, I think you need to put together a plan and some sort of goal to which the church can aspire. I think that that's a lot easier for the church to get behind, to basically demonstrate, okay, this is where I am, this is where I should be, and this is how we get there, is much, much easier than this year we fix COLA. Next year we have to fix COLA and retirement. The year after we have to fix COLA, retirement, and healthcare. Then we have to fix COLA, retirement, healthcare, and Social Security. Then we have to fix COLA, retirement, healthcare, Social Security, and insert new benefit. I think that over time with that, either you're going to get burnout, you're going to be viewed as ungrateful by some, and I think sometimes it'll just fall on deaf ears, and that's what I'm concerned about. So I think laying out a program and a platform to get there, kind of like what we were just discussing with Pastor Grays, is going to be the most beneficial option to bring you and your church into alignment.
Hello, Christian. My name is Wilbert Baker. Can you hear me?
I can, sir.
I've transitioned through what Pastor Graves was talking about, and I was just going to listen, but I think I need to say this. It depends on what type of job that he has and what kind of congregation that he has. And what I mean by that, I remember the first time I made that transition, I had I'm going to say an upper middle class job, and the congregation were more basically middle and lower middle class. And when you have a job that has a pretty decent salary, and then you get bonuses every year in addition to that, that is based upon the performance of the company, that could, like the position I was in when I did it, you could get as much as 30% of your salary again at the end of your bonus.
And a church can't compete with that. No, I get you.
And so some church people think that's just way too much money. And what can happen is they'll say, okay, we can do this. And after you get in the middle of it, it'll be the biggest disappointment. It'll cause stress. It'll cause family problems. In some cases, I've seen it. It didn't in mine, but it was a troubled transition. It can even cause divorce. And so bivocational is not a bad thing as some people think it is. And you're not any less of a pastor, but it sounds like he has a pretty good job. And I just think that that's going to be a deep and wide conversation, or it'll be a lot of trouble along the lines.
Pastor Baker, I completely agree. And, that's why I think you have to have a plan. And I think it's got to be more than a 6-month plan. It's got to be that, show me a long runway. I want to see that the church can consistently do what it is that they have told me that they can do to avoid that transition heartache. I'm also a firm believer that as the demographics change in this country, that more and more pastors will, out of necessity, become bivocational. So I believe that the time is now for us to start to rethink bivocational and the stigma that has been associated with that. And as you aptly said, a bivocational pastor is no less a pastor. He is a pastor. He just so happens to be working 2 jobs instead of 1. So I think that those are wise words. But I am also very excited to see in your case that it worked well for you and your congregation, but that you also give the caveat of in a lot of places, such as what I was suggesting, it has worked out to the detriment of the church and the pastor that they were trying to transition.
Let me say this. It did not work out well. I end up leaving that church and starting another church that is working out well now. But it's been a while. We started from scratch and built a church. But here's the thing. If you, with bonuses, I just put a number out there, you're making 100,000, and most of the people in that congregation, white husband and wife, is making 38 or 40, they will never see 100,000 as a viable option. Never. They will never see that. And that's just something that he needs to know. And so I'm glad you're doing this financial literacy, because I am one who's been there and done that, who went all the way to the bottom and built it up, just happened to have the grace of God to make it through it all. And so when I hear pastors talking about doing that, my heart goes out. I'm like, oh my goodness, he better, really go slow on that one. And you also mentioned, and I want to suggest this, that if any way they could be in the education system, in the African-American community, there are a lot of pastors who were educators and were pastors the whole time. It gives you weekends off, it gives you the summer off, and it gives you the benefits, medical benefits that you need. That's a great option.
Yeah, and I agree. And when I have these conversations with people, I normally say, if you and I mentioned this briefly, if you're a pastor at a smaller church, the best way to gauge what your congregation should be capable of doing, if you're looking to transition as a bivocational or something or from bivocational to full-time, or just to transition from current to where you are, is look at the salary system for what a teacher in your area makes. And as you were saying, if your congregation makes $38,000 to $40,000, odds are you're in an area where your teachers are paid probably $40,000 to $45,000. That's something that, plus benefits, that's something that is negotiable. $100,000 is not.
Exactly.
And I think that is a very wise concept. And I'm a big fan of bivocational pastors looking at teaching options in the public school system and government jobs, whether it be state or local government, federal as well. All of those provide great benefits and the opportunity for those weekends off.
Absolutely, because medical benefits are expensive. I'm with, even with Guidestone, which is good benefits, but you're going to still need about $2,000 a month to have them. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Pastor Baker, for your questions, and Pastor Rarick and Pastor Grays. Are there any other questions before we close out the meeting? Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions. I want to thank you, Christian, again, for all of this helpful information. I love the conversation that we had today, and I think it was a conversation that needed to be had. And we pray that whoever needs to hear this, whether they watch the recording or they're attending, for the live webinar, that the Lord would use it to help that pastor and that church get to a place where the pastor can thrive financially and support their family.
And thank you for sticking with me for an extra 30 minutes. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Christian, for the time that you put into and you pour into pastors, and just thank you for taking the time with everyone. I'm going to email out the PowerPoint presentation that Christian presented. I'm also going to email out a link to the recording as well. And I'll also have the link to the Guidestone compensation planning resources that are really helpful. It breaks down a lot of what Christian covered. It's got some forms you can fill out and things like that with a lay leader or with someone from your church. And I'm also going to be including information about our church matching and protection benefit program. It's the matching retirement program that Christian mentioned that's offered through Guidestone and through the Texas Baptist. So all of that information will be included. I want to remind you that at the Center for Financial Health, we do have financial counselors that are available that can help you. We have tax professionals that can also assist, and other, pastors and lay leaders and executive pastors, you name it. If you need help working with your church on this, we can get folks that can help you have those conversations. Obviously, we're here to be objective and just provide the information. We, our churches are autonomous, so it's ultimately up to the church and their guidance and direction of the Holy Spirit as far as how to compensate the pastor. But we firmly believe that, it's the heart of our churches to provide well for our pastors and to love them well as they, sacrifice for the church. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and close out the call. Thank you all again, and be looking out for an email from me with the link and other information. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.